So how do big institutions really change? Is it always a big public battle of ideas? Or is it sometimes quieter? Today, we're diving into a really provocative argument from Christina Hoff Sommers' book, Who Stole Feminism? Her claim? That American universities weren't transformed by winning debates, but by a quiet, deliberate takeover of the bureaucracy itself. Okay, so this quote right here from 1982, this is basically the starting pistol for the whole argument. The source says this isn't just about getting more women in leadership roles. No, it's a blueprint. The whole idea, according to the author, is to get people with a very specific new consciousness into those power positions so they can drive change from the inside. This one idea is pretty much the engine for everything else we're going to talk about.
Right, so this is the absolute core of the author's claim. The transformation of universities wasn't some slow, organic shift in thinking. It wasn't about winning arguments in the public square. No, the argument here is that it was a planned, administrative, bureaucratic revolution. It was designed to reshape these places from the top down and from the inside out.
All right, so how are we going to unpack this idea of a bureaucratic revolution? Simple. First, we'll look at the revolution itself. Then we'll dig into the specific playbook the author claims was used. After that, we'll see what happened to people who disagreed and why the author thinks resistance didn't really work. And finally, we'll connect it all to the world outside the university.
Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty. How did this bureaucratic revolution actually happen? Well, the author lays out what she calls a very clear step-by-step playbook.
So, according to the book, the playbook has 4 main parts. Step 1, you get your allies, people with that new consciousness, into key administrative jobs. Step 2, you use those positions to screen all the new hires, faculty, other administrators, to make sure they're on the same page ideologically. Step 3, you overhaul the curriculum itself. And finally, Step 4, you get the existing faculty on board, often through re-education workshops sweetened with a little bit of funding. And here's where it gets really concrete. This isn't just theory. The author points to this questionnaire from the Association of American Colleges, the AAC. And look at these questions. They're not your typical job interview stuff, right? They're digging deep into a candidate's ideological commitment, asking them to prove it, and even asking how they handle people who push back. It's a perfect example of that screening process in action.
And this number, $500,000, this really tells a story. According to the source, this is what happened at the University of Maryland. After they used these kinds of screening methods to hire a new president, he immediately set aside $500,000 for a curriculum transformation project. And, the author makes a big point of this, it was done without a vote from the faculty senate. It just goes to show the power of having your people in those key administrative spots.
And if you had any doubt about the strategy, check out this quote from Betty Smits, who the author describes as a key figure in this movement. It is wonderful to be able to supply appropriate words to the head of an institution. I mean, it's pretty explicit, right? The goal is to have your people in the right place at the right time to whisper in the ear of the leadership, to give them the talking points to push the agenda forward. So what does transforming the curriculum actually mean on the ground? Well, the book gives us this example from Mount Holyoke's philosophy department. Look at the before. You had to take ancient philosophy, modern philosophy, logic, the classics. Now look at the after. Those requirements? Gone. Instead, students are encouraged to design their own major with new options like feminist philosophy or even feminist science fiction. It's a pretty stark difference.
Okay, so you can probably guess that a change this big didn't happen without some pushback. The next part of the author's argument is all about the people who spoke out and what happened to them when they did.
And the author really paints a picture of a David and Goliath situation here. On one side, you have this movement with millions of dollars in funding, members everywhere, and the full backing of the universities themselves. And on the other side, the main opposition group she talks about, the National Association of Scholars. They're working with a fraction of the budget and have zero institutional support. It's not exactly a fair fight according to this account.
And what's really fascinating is that, according to the author, some of the strongest dissent came from within feminism. She quotes Mary Lefkowitz, a classicist who identified as an equity feminist. Lefkowitz had fought against the old boy network, and her point here is just dripping with irony. She's basically saying, we fought to get rid of one system of preference just to install another one. And the professional risks for dissenting were, according to the book, incredibly high. I mean, just look at the example of Camille Paglia. When her book Sexual Persona came out, it wasn't just criticized. The author claims that faculty at one college actually compared it to Mein Kampf. Think about that. That's not academic debate. That's a career-ending kind of accusation. It really shows how high the stakes were for anyone who challenged the new direction.
So this all begs a huge question, right? If these changes were so sweeping and the backlash so intense, why didn't more people in the academic world push back? Why wasn't there more organized resistance? Well, the author has a few key explanations for why she thinks it failed.
Okay, so the author's main theory for the lack of resistance comes down to this term she coins befuddled liberalism. Here's the idea. She argues that a lot of old-school, well-meaning liberals just couldn't tell the difference between two types of feminism. One she calls equity feminism. You know, classic legal equality, equal opportunity. The other she calls gender feminism, a much more radical view of society as an oppressive patriarchy. And she claims this confusion, this befuddlement, was used strategically against them.
And according to the author, this quote from Paula Rothenberg is basically the smoking gun. Our surprising success was due to old-style liberals who found it difficult to disagree in public. It's like she's saying it right out loud. The strategy worked because traditional liberals who believe in fairness and inclusion felt backed into a corner. How could they publicly argue against something that sounded so progressive, even if they had their doubts?
And then there's just good old-fashioned conflict avoidance. The author tells this story about a professor she talked to. He sat through a lecture he found totally incomprehensible, just nonsense. But did he say anything? Nope. When she asked him why, he just said, "I'm just hoping it will all go away." That kind of passivity, that hope that it was just a fad, the author argues that was a huge reason the movement succeeded.
All right, so for the final piece of the puzzle, the author argues that what happens in the university doesn't stay in the university. She makes the case that these changes on campus created massive ripple effects out in the wider world.
And she lays out a pretty clear pipeline for how this influence supposedly works. It starts in academia, where studies are produced to show systemic bias. Then, activist groups take that research and use it as ammunition to lobby for new laws and government policies. And the end result of all this? A whole new career path is born. Sex equity experts, gender bias officers, people whose jobs literally depend on this academic framework being true.
And this whole system, according to the source, runs on a lot of money. Sure, you see private foundation grants on this chart, but the author really hones in on the two bigger sources, public money from state universities and the university's own budgets. Her big point is that a significant chunk of this is taxpayer money funding these initiatives, often with very little direct public say in the matter.
So to wrap it all up, the argument we've been unpacking is this. A smart, well-funded, and bureaucratically savvy movement didn't win a war of ideas. Instead, it quietly and methodically used the levers of power, hiring, funding, administration, to stage a revolution from within, completely transforming American universities.
And that leaves us with a really tough question, a tension at the very heart of this whole story. When you use the bureaucratic power of an institution, its hiring, its funding, its rules, to push a specific social or moral vision, where do you draw the line? At what point does institutional transformation become the enemy of academic freedom? That's a huge question, and there are definitely no easy answers.